The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
One day, as evening drew on, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us cross over to the further shore of the lake." Leaving the crowd, they took him away in the boat in which he was sitting, while the other boats accompanied him. It happened that a bad storm blew up. The waves were breaking over the boat, and it began to ship water badly. Jesus was in the stern through it all, sound asleep on a cushion. They finally woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, doesn't it matter to you that we're going to drown?" He awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Quiet, be still." The wind fell off, and everything grew calm. Then he said to them, "Why are you so terrified? Why are you lacking in faith?" A great awe overcame them at this. They kept saying to one another, "Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" A gospel inspired by God.
Thanks be to God.
The FMBR has been in existence for about 30 years. It's called the Foundation for Mind-Being Research. And there's a group of scientists in the Bay Area who get together regularly, and other people are welcome to attend their lectures as well. And once a month, on the fourth Friday of each month, they bring in a visiting speaker, a scientist who is also interested in spiritual stuff. So their interest is in bringing together science and spirituality. And they've brought in some really interesting speakers over the years. And they send out a newsletter, and I'm on their mailing list, and occasionally I'll attend some of the lectures. But I haven't been attending for about 3 years because I tend to work very late on Friday nights. But the last one I got from them mentioned that the speaker was going to be a guy called Bernard Haisch. And I'm fascinated by this guy's writings. I've spoken about him a few times before here. He's an astrophysicist, worked many years with NASA, a man about my own age. And he started off actually in a seminary. He wanted to be a Catholic priest, but he left after a few years. He never finished, and he went into astrophysics instead. And a very interesting character. And he's written a few books, one of them called The God Theory. So he was the speaker last Friday night. So I decided I was going to miss dinner and go to attend a lecture. So I went there on Friday night, and he gave a lecture. And he's the guy I mentioned before who came up with the theory of creation by subtraction. That fascinated me. And creation by subtraction is the belief system that by limiting infinite possibilities, we create finite realities. By limiting infinite possibilities, we create finite realities. He believes that that's how actually creation happens. I'll give you an example. If you go into a movie theater and there's a projectionist box up at the back and there's a beam of white light beaming down to the front. The white light, you can't distinguish anything in white light. It's impossible to see anything in white light. In order to create images, you have to begin to obstruct the white light. You have to put a roll of film in front of it that selectively obstructs various parts of the light, and that creates images on the screen. And so it's by limiting infinite possibility, you create finite reality. You can only begin to see images by actually limiting the light. And his belief system was that in a sense is how creation happens. That the light, the ultimate light, which is God, has to be limited in some senses. You have to occlude parts of it in order to get the images of manifest creation. So I've been fascinated by his stuff. And the funny thing was, in the week after I got the mailing, I came across his name in 3 different books that I was reading. So I figured out that's a sign. I got to attend this lecture on Friday night. So I decided I'm going to skip dinner and go straight from work to the meeting. And I went there, and it was really fascinating. And I want to use that as my jumping off point tonight, because he mentioned something else in the course of the lecture that sparked a whole line of thinking on my part. And I gave a little homily yesterday morning for the Saturday morning Mass, and a few people afterwards said to me, expand on that, talk about that tomorrow and expand on it a little bit. So I decided I'd do that today. So I'm going to make 3 main points today. I'm going to talk about typing civilizations. It's the first point I'll make. Secondly, I will talk about Jesus Christ. Was he an avatar, an extraterrestrial, or the only Son of God. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about Project Earth. So they're the 3 points I'll make this morning. So the first one, typing civilizations. Now, the current estimate actually of the world, of the universe, is that we used to think it was 13.7 billion years of age. The most modern computations estimate that it's actually 15 billion years of age. But it's certainly a lot older than planet Earth. Planet Earth is about 4.6 billion years of age. And so obviously there are parts of the universe which are at least 10 billion years older than planet Earth. So very, very obviously, life got started in these places a long, long, long time before life got started here. So is there intelligent life out there? There's a professor emeritus in Santa Cruz called Francis Drake, and in the 1950s he came up with what is perhaps the second most important formula of the 20th century. It's an estimate of the number of civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy that have developed technology capable of communicating outside of their own solar system. And the formula very simply says that the number of those civilizations is equal to n star multiplied by fp, multiplied by fe, multiplied by fl, multiplied by fi, multiplied by fc, multiplied by l. And the factors in that equation mean the following. Okay, you got it, Lee? Good, Georgie. Okay. N star stands for the number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy, which is something in the region of 200 billion. FP represents the fraction of those of star systems that have planets in attendance. FE represents of those, or the fraction of those planets that are Earth-like. In other words, they're rocky and have temperate kinds of climates. FL represents the fraction of those that have thrown up life. FI represents the fraction that have thrown up intelligent life. And FC represents the fraction that have thrown up intelligent life capable of communicating outside their own planetary system. And L represents the longevity of such a civilization. Because any civilization that develops that technology runs the risk of destroying itself. And so his formula, there's his formula. Now, there are various ways of plugging the data into that formula. But a very conservative estimate of the number of such civilizations just in the Milky Way galaxy, and remember that there are about 150 billion galaxies, so that's just one galaxy, a very conservative estimate of the number of such civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy is 10,000. So a very conservative estimate is that there are about 10,000 civilizations just in this one galaxy which are more advanced than we are. You take that notion. Now, a Russian scientist ran with that, and this is where Bernard Haisch, this is what he mentioned on Friday night that set me thinking. He said there's a Russian scientist who claims that he can divide those civilizations into 3 types. Type 1 civilizations are those civilizations that have learned mastery over their own planet. So all those civilizations who have learned how to control the climate on their planet, how to control their oceans and their volcanoes, and who have learned how to harness the energy of their own planet to meet their own needs. That would be a type 1 civilization. A type 2 civilization would be a civilization that has learned to harness its own star. It's not depending on its planet for the resources. It's not just harnessing its own planet and depleting those. It's harnessing its own star. And it's using the energy of its own star, solar flares and stuff like that, in order to meet its energy needs. And a type 3 civilization, according to this Russian scientist, would be a civilization which is not just harnessing the energy of its own star, but is actually harnessing the energy of its own galaxy. It's drawing its energy from an entire galaxy. Now, obviously, such a civilization is much, much, much more advanced than we. Where do humans rank on that scale? We're a type 0, literally. We live on a planet that we can't control, and we're trying to harness it, not particularly successfully. Now, I think what's happening, I believe personally, that we're a civilization and we're a species which is trying to make the movement from being a type 0 to a type 1 civilization. But so far, we're doing a really, really poor job of it. We're managing to deplete the planet, possibly to destroy it. We're wiping out a whole bunch of life forms, and we run the danger, actually, of destroying ourselves. So all of the people who talk about this theory believe that the transition from type 0 to type 1 is the most difficult and the most dangerous of all the shifts. It is much easier and far less dangerous to go from a type 1 civilization to a type 2, or from a type 2 civilization to a type 3. The most dangerous transition of all is the transition from type 0 into type 1. And we're in the brink of that at the moment. And so we're either going to make it and become a type 1 civilization where we have mastery of a planet and we can control our resources and control our climate, or we're going to destroy ourselves in the process. So there's my first point. There's the typing of various kinds of civilizations. Second point then, when we think then about Jesus Christ, is Jesus Christ an avatar? Is he an extraterrestrial? Or is he God's only son? You've known me long enough to realize that I do not believe that Jesus Christ is God's only son. I've said to you again and again and again that I believe that everything that lives is a word of God made flesh. That God did not have an only son. That Jesus is not in this kind of special relationship, but that the difference between Jesus and the rest of us is that Jesus is a fully realized emanation from source, whereas the rest of us are asleep at the wheel. And so I don't believe that Jesus is this only Son of God. So is he an avatar? Yes, for me he's an avatar. Is he an extraterrestrial? Very possibly. So is Jesus Christ, a denizen from a type 1 civilization, a type 2 civilization, or a type 3 civilization? So I specifically chose the reading today because it speaks to me that he at least had mastered type 1 civilization. Type 1 civilization are those who can manage their own climate. They have charge of their oceans, the wind, volcanoes, all these kinds of things. So here's the great story about Jesus today. He's crossing the lake. He's been preaching all day long. He's fast asleep in the stern of the boat, lying on a pillow. And this extraordinary storm breaks up, and they're shipping water, and they're in danger of drowning. And he's fast asleep. And they're scared. And they wake him up and they say, "Isn't it of concern to you that we're drowning?" And he stands up in the boat, extends his hands out over the ocean, and says, "Peace, be still." And the waves subside, and the wind dies down. Now, is this just a fancy story somebody made up in order to kind of promote the cause of Jesus? Or is it an indication, in fact, that Jesus is at least from a type 1 civilization? That he comes from a civilization in which they have control, total control over their climate and their environment. Now, maybe he's even beyond that. Maybe he's a type 2 or a type 3. Or maybe even, if I were to make a new classification, maybe he's a type 4. That a type 4 civilization would be a civilization that has learned to control its entire universe, not just its galaxy, but its entire universe. And so is Jesus Christ, is he just an avatar, and whatever avatar means for you? Or is he, in fact, is he some kind of an extraterrestrial from an advanced civilization, which is type 1, type 2, type 3, or type 4? I want to just mention two things about him. I want to mention Eucharist, and I want to mention resurrection. So all of these stories you hear about Jesus, healing people or raising people from the dead, are they just kind of mishigas? Are they just kind of made up mythology? Or is there some power and some meaning to them? Now suppose Jesus were a type 1, a type 2, a type 3, or a type 4 citizen of such a civilization. He would have mastery over not just the climate, he would have mastery over physical manifestation or demanifestation, and he would have obviously control over even time. So I'm going to just take a few incidents from his life. So when Jesus talked about Eucharist, for instance, when he instituted Eucharist, and he said, "Take this, this is my body. Every time you eat of this, you're eating of my flesh and drinking of my blood." So what was he doing? Was Jesus Christ giving us actually a piece of bread and saying, this is my big toes in there someplace and my kidney is there someplace, if you chomp down on it, you'll find it? Is he talking about that? Or is he saying in some senses that he's mastery of space and time, and that he's of such an advanced intelligence that he can literally bring himself into manifestation, he can demanifest and remanifest as well? Now that's not so extraordinary. You did it yourself. You took 9 months to do it, but you did it. You went from 0 to a full human being in 9 months. Now, is it possible that a more advanced civilization could accelerate that process? We used to think, for instance, that you can't travel faster than the speed of light. We know that that's not true anymore. There have been experiments done by Alan Spector, as a French physicist, showing that you can have teleportation. You've got entangled particles that are communicating with each other at 1 billion times the speed of light, 10 to the power of 9 times c. So we know that the speed of light isn't the upper limit. You can go billions of times faster than the speed of light. So in fact, is an advanced person or an advanced individual like a Jesus somebody who can take what we do in 9 months and speed it up so fast that he could create and manifest a physical body, a full-grown, mature, adult physical body, just like that, and then dissolve it just like that, and remanifest it elsewhere just like that, or bilocate and make two versions of himself instantaneously in different locations. It's not even science fiction anymore. It's really, really possible. So is that what he's about? And when we celebrate Eucharist, when we take the host and the wine later and we say, this is my body, and we have our own words here, the body which I accepted at my incarnation. In fact, is it an effort through a shifting of consciousness and mindsets that we're shifting out of time, that we've learned how to master time, he's teaching us how to master time, and that we're having real encounters. Not just with the Jesus who appeared as the Nazarene 2,000 years ago, but the entity, the extraordinary advanced entity, who's been on the planet many times before that, has been here since, and will be here again. Are we having encounters with that level of intelligence? So who is Jesus Christ for you then? Is he still this pristine, only Son of God? Is he an extraterrestrial? Is he an avatar? You think about that today. What does he mean to you? This brings me to my third point. I'm going to talk about Project Earth, and I'm going to make 4 sub-points here, just to confuse you. I'm going to talk about ancient life, I'm going to talk about ancient gods, I'm going to talk about modern gods, and I'm going to talk about future gods. So here's the first sub-point. So where did life come from on planet Earth? Planet Earth is about 4.6 billion years of age. Life didn't begin to emerge until about 3.7 billion years ago. So where did this life come from? Well, there are many theories. One is that there's some kind of spontaneous combustion, some kind of primordial soup just birthed life. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Another theory is that we got bombarded by meteorites, and that these meteorites came from other parts of space where life had already emerged, and so there was some kind of bacteria or some atoms embedded, and when they crashed into planet Earth, they germinated life here. The Sumerians, which is the oldest civilization on the planet, it goes back to 3,800 BC. They have a theory, and it's in their writings. They've left lots of artifacts in their wake. And their belief system was that before Earth existed, there was a planet called Tiamat, located where the asteroid belt is at the moment. And that there was a planet they named Nibiru. And it came through, and there was a crash between the moons of this planet. It came in with 9 moons. And they crashed and they bombarded Tiamat. And then they smashed it into 2 pieces. One piece became the asteroid belt, and the other part got jettisoned into a different orbit and became planet Earth. And that Nibiru had life on it, and it seeded planet Earth. That was the teaching of the Sumerians 6,000 years ago. No less a character than Francis Crick, one of the co-discoverer of DNA. In 1973, he was interviewed, and he talked about a theory that's called Panspermia, that life on planet Earth came from outside the planet itself. And he was asked in an interview, how could spores travel through intergalactic space and manage to survive and land on planet Earth? And he gave an answer that astounded the interviewer. This is Sir Francis Crick. He said, these spores came down in a specially designed space capsule. Figure that one out. So who sent that one? This is Francis Crick. So how did life begin on this little planet of ours? Is it in fact possible that given that life had emerged 10 billion years earlier elsewhere, that planet Earth is in fact a little garden project? That some group of extraterrestrials found this little green-blue jewel and figured out it'd be a nice little garden, and they came down here and they planted a garden. And over the course of millennia, they've come back and they've weeded it, and they've watered it, and they've nurtured it. Is that possible? So in fact, are we just a life form that has been bred by a very, very advanced civilization from elsewhere? Again, the Sumerians, this is their teaching. The Sumerians have lots of teaching talking about a group of extraterrestrials that they call the Anunnaki, whom they believe visited planet Earth 445,000 years ago. They brought animal husbandry and plant husbandry with them at some stage, and they genetically modified some really primitive hominids and created Homo sapiens and eventually Homo sapiens sapiens. And this story gets into the Bible as the story that God created us in his own image. He created us, male and female, he created us. There are actual protocols in the Sumerian writings where they talk about how the Anunnaki literally harvested eggs from hominid women, cross-fertilized it with seed from their own males, and then implanted their own women and delivered them by caesarean section in order to create a workforce for themselves. And they called them Adam. The first one they called Adam. So is it possible that even Homo sapiens sapiens itself is the result of a garden tending by some kind of a really advanced society long, long before us? And that because we have some kind of a race memory of this event, all religions talk about gods that come from the skies. Now there's a very interesting phenomenon called cargo cults. I don't know, have you come across that notion? Cargo cults is the reality that when a technologically sophisticated society encounters a technologically primitive society and lives among them for a period of time and brings all of their kinds of gifts and their technology and then subsequently leaves, the primitive societies turn them into gods. And they begin worship and they offer them sacrifice, hoping to entice them back with more gifts. And this has happened in the entire civilization of the planet. And it happened particularly in Polynesia and the South Pacific just before and during World War II. The Japanese and the Americans landed on on islands that previously hadn't seen civilized human beings. And these natives were fascinated by the technology that the Japanese and the Americans brought. Totally fascinated. And when they finally left at the end of World War II, these people created what are now called the cargo cults, religions that began to worship those people who had just left and had brought all of these kind of technology. And you go back to these islands today, and they have made really crude imitations of landing strips and aeroplanes and radio antennae. And they have rituals around these things, hoping to entice the gods to come back to give them more of the cargo. That's why they're called cargo cults, because these people gave them a whole bunch of sophisticated gifts. And they're all over the planet. And in fact, when you read the history of the evolution of civilization, every single mythology has these kinds of stories. You find it in the Sumerians, which is the oldest group. You find it in the Babylonian mythology. You find it in the Assyrians. You find it in the Canaanites. You find it in the Hittites. You find it in the Egyptians. You find it in the Greeks. You find it in the Romans. You find it in the Aztecs. You find it in the Mayan. You find it in the Dogon of West Africa. All of these mythologies contain stories about sky gods who came down, created us, and gave us a whole bunch of gifts. And we got to offer them a sacrifice in order to bring them back again. So there would be they'd be the ancient gods. Now what a modern version of that be like? When we exploded our first new atomic device in 1945 and subsequently used it in Hiroshima, around the same time, a little bit previously, we had developed rocketry, which would allow us to escape from the planet for the very first time ever. We could send stuff outside of our own planet for the first time. Interesting, at this stage, there was a huge increase in the reports of unidentified flying objects, particularly around nuclear installations. Many, many well-verified accounts that occasionally some kind of a UFO appeared and it literally shut down the silos, that the firing mechanisms for the intercontinental ballistic missiles literally were deactivated for several hours at a time. No explanation given. Now, is it possible that these people who created the garden and have been tending it and watering it and weeding it and genetically modifying some of the species, including ourselves, is it possible that at some stage they came down because they're now concerned about developments here? Something is going wrong in the garden. So are they our angel guardians who are trying to protect us from ourselves? Are they interested more in their garden than they are in us? And there's a species of life, there's a weed developing now that's threatening to destroy the whole garden, or some kind of bugs who are going to eat all the plants and they're not going to let it happen. So is that what's happening here? Are they trying to protect us? Are they trying to police us? Are they trying to say, okay, you know, you can mess up this little garden, but now that you've developed the technology to get off your own planet, you're not going to import that kind of stuff out into the solar system or out into the brotherhood of the galaxy. So no, it's not going to happen. We're not going to allow that to happen. Is that what they're doing? Or is the possibility that actually these guardians of ours are here to usher us in to Christ consciousness, which is my last sub-point? Is that why they're here? Is it not so much about that they're, you know, protecting us from ourselves or policing us, or that they're kind of taking possession of their garden once more, but that this experiment that they've overseen on behalf of God, that they're now inviting us to a stage where we make this shift into Christ consciousness, that this is our journey. And if that's so, who then is Jesus? Is Jesus an avatar? Is he an extraterrestrial? Or in fact, is he a human being from our own future? Imagine a situation, a bifurcation point that happens frequently. According to, you know, modern physics, John Wheeler and Hugh Everett came up with the notion in the 1950s of parallel universes, that there are parallel possibilities, that when you come to a bifurcation point, a huge decision, you take A and B. So Yogi Berra was right. When you come to a crossroads, take it. Both parts of it. So is it possible that the human species has reached a bifurcation point where we've spun off two parallel universes, one of which has made the shift into Christ consciousness, and the other one which didn't, and is in danger of destroying itself? And this group that has moved on into a totally advanced civilization, a Christ-conscious civilization, is now time traveling and is coming back to try to influence the other universe so that this universe as well gets redeemed, that the entire universe gets redeemed, this parallel universe, so that those of us who are inclined to go down the path of self-destruction and global annihilation, that we're being offered another alternative. That a being from our own future, a Christ figure, has come back to lead the second level, the second universe, into the path of Christ consciousness as well. And that this is the function of Jesus. That Jesus came down to set this process in motion, to invite us into a realization that we can make it from type 0 to type 1, and that we can become Christ-conscious human beings. In conclusion, let me say this. I believe that we live in an L-shaped cosmos. In fact, a 4L-shaped cosmos. And the 4 L's of the cosmos are love, light, life, and laughter. And what do I mean by those? I am totally convinced that the core energy of source, the core energy emanating from source, is pure, unconditional love. I'm convinced that light, as we understand it, is the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit, or light, is the medium guiding the evolutionary trajectory. And that life is the dance that happens when love meets light. And that laughter is the only valid response for any species that becomes self-aware and witnesses the dance between love and light. The only response is laughter. And I don't mean laughter as in cynical laughter or mocking or self-righteous laughter. I mean the utter sanctity of the realization and the utter wonder that grips us when you see love dancing with light. The only valid response is to laugh.